Three, two, one. Welcome back to the Godful Universe podcast. This is Dan Evans, co-creator and writer of the Godful Universe
with Josh Adams, artist and other co-creator of the Godful universe.
pro-creator of the Godful Universe.
Tyler, the procreator.
Your mic's a little low. Give it just a little bit of a bump.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't want to be the loudest person.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's much better.
Nice.
All right. So today we wanted to talk world building, ins and outs of it, pros and cons of it as done by certain people, genres, and so, from whether you're doing it yourself and whether it's already been done, and we're going to critique it. I was thinking about it in the sense of there's so many, especially there's so many young people. I say young people, they're probably like 20 to 40 years old on YouTube, particularly in like the novel writing scene, usually young adult, that always harp on world building. And I think people have gotten the idea of world building as like going wide and going back, of thinking like, okay, I need a long history and I need to tell as much about my world as possible. And they harp on like, they kind of treat it like there's sociologists or I forget the word, not my brain's, anyway, they treat it like an academic sense. And I mean, I don't know. When I think about world building, I usually just think about characters.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, and a lot of currently a lot of the created worlds you see are like, you were saying how wide. Yeah, they're like 1,000 miles wide and an inch deep.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's not a lot of a world building. Yeah, I to a degree, I think I agree with you about it, being character driven. Um, and we'll get into that. I think about it a lot from an artist standpoint. The part that I love about, Tolkien, for example,
Well, he's the
is,
standard for
looking.
everything good in writing.
We talk about him a lot,
Yeah, not in
but
a
like
bad
with
way.
the,
Just
but when you look at, well, he obviously he didn't invent world building. The argument could be made that I guess that Homer did with the Iliad and the Odyssey.
yeah.
But when you look at how he built the world, when you read The Hobbit, you encounter a few different cultures, and you just get a glimpse of them, and there's enough there to show that they're obviously very different from one another.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on in the Lord of the Rings, we get a much more clear view of those different cultures, and we get these hints at a greater, like a bigger history and a bigger story. And then you can go to the Silmarillion if you want to, or the Unfinished Tales, or some of the different appendices that they put out of the histories of Middle Earth. There is it. It's one of those things that, I think it works best when you do it the way that he did. He had that stuff in mind. Like, he already had those ideas, but he only introduced a small window of it at a time.
I'm laughing because when he said Silmarillion, I thought of Chamarillion.
But I mean, you know what I mean, though, is like, you could read Lord of the Rings and not read The Hobbit.
Yeah, and vice versa.
You could read the Silmarillion and not necessarily follow up with any of the other stuff, but each of those things enriched one another.
Well, he wrote in a way that it's so strange because he could do entire pages of world building, but he could do it. I think I've talked about this with somebody before. He could do it two ways at the same time. Like, he could do it peripherally.
Mm-hmm.
And like, here's the story, and he can build as it's going. And he could go super deep dive and just tell you a song for a page and the history of it. And he was so good, he could almost make him feel like the same thing.
Yeah.
He's a crazy anomaly like that, and I think that's why he's so studied. Other than just being an amazing writer, but that's those kind of things that makes him an amazing writer. It's really hard to critique Tolkien. Like even like I mean, the Two Towers when I was in high school, I had a hard time getting through because I didn't have any time because I was working and studying all the time. But I never remember not liking it, even when it's discussing like the history of the Ents.
Hmm.
He wrote in such
Yeah.
a romantic way.
Well, I mean, it's cool because you can look at The Hobbit, and it is a more insular novel. It's stripped down, but even in The Hobbit, there are these little hints and glimpses that there is a way bigger world. We may not understand
Mm-hmm.
it, and we may not know any of the details about it, but it's clear that that stuff is there from the
When
very beginning.
when choosing a hobbit,
Yeah.
a little person, a little guy who lives in his hole and they don't experience the outside world. That's the whole point. An
Hmm.
unexpected
Yeah.
adventure, unexpected journey, and
Hmm.
everything's new to Bilbo.
Right.
I
And
get
to us, and it's a great audience
yeah.
proxy.
Well, in part of it, I think he wrote it this is a completely different world, and his characters behave that way. His characters don't. They're not like George R. R. Martin, where they behave like modern day people in a fantasy setting. And I know there's
Hmm.
an argument for that, that people haven't changed, but that's the whole thing is like this is a completely different world. This is a world where humans are given a physical standard to live up to and to
Hmm.
decay down to, like orcs and versus elves and dwarves. You know what I mean? So
Right.
those virtues are a little bit more apparent.
And you can look at Tolkien's approach to world building. Tolkien he never focused on world building to the detriment of the story.
Yeah.
The narrative is always the goal for him. But you can look at his notes and his journals that he put out and the things that his son and like the Tolkien estate have released through the years, posthumously.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at how he developed whole written and spoken languages for different cultures,
Mm-hmm.
and he created maps. He created creature designs, and sketches of what Smaug and some of these other creatures would look like. Like he clearly felt like to tell a story well, he had to understand the world, and as long as he understood the world,
Mm-hmm.
the story would benefit from it without having to be just exposition. So, like the Lord of the Rings as a story, it benefits from the fact that the foundation under that, he understands his world. He understands all of what's behind Sauron, even if all we know is that Sauron is evil,
Oh man.
right? He
Oh man.
understands the background.
Did you see that like viral thing some guy posted from like an unofficial Tolkien account? It was like how much he loved the gray area of Sauron, like his morality, because he basically he took one page from like the Silmarillion, like, and then he took like one paragraph. It was like Sauron versus Melkor, and how Sauron basically just he was just trying to create order, and it's like, yeah, that's not a gray area, man. That means that you had quote unquote good intentions and then you like murdered billions of creatures to try to get it. That means you're evil. That makes you worse. Like it means you refuse to
Well,
recognize your own evil actions. Sorry, I had to when he said that, like I had to bring that up. Like, man, whatever. Ugh.
well, that's the scholarly approach now. Is I mean, everything is about going back and either deconstructing or going like retroactively going back and trying to view something through the lens of our own
There's a
cultural
weird obsession.
biases.
There's a weird obsession with villains too, like a weird
Yeah,
like trying to Disneyfy them. I don't know another.
yeah,
I don't know another word for it. It's like it would just be it to me. I forget who said it, but it's like they described it perfectly. They're like, whenever your little sister make sure G.I. Joe come to the Tea Party. That's what we have an entire generation of writers that do that now, especially with villains. They bring everything down to their stupid Tumblr level. And
Yep.
yeah.
All right, so when we think about world building, you've got this approach that Tolkien had, where he had this exhaustive. I mean, he had spent incredible
Years.
amounts of time.
Well, he knew what to cut out too. He had so much. He knew what wasn't needed.
He was very good at editing himself.
Yeah.
So you have that approach, but then you also have the approach that, like, for example, Stephen King, the Dark Tower series is an incredible example of world building, and his approach, and he's able to make it work. But his approach was, like, he wrote The Gunslinger when he was like 17, I think. He was still in high school, I think, when he wrote The Gunslinger, at least the original draft of it. And throughout the years, and he's writing all these books throughout the years, and every once in a while, we would get a new Dark Tower book. But then there's so many other books that he wrote that have Dark Tower connections that are not part of that original series, but it makes his entire world feel connected. And so you may have a book that makes a statement that's connected to Derry, which is the city from from it and a few others, and then you connect that to Castle Rock. He's got all these invented cities that are connected, and then if something in Derry connects to the Dark Tower, that means that something in everything else is connected to the Dark Tower.
Yeah.
And so he just sprinkled stuff in. I do not believe that Stephen King had planned out the whole Dark Tower saga. I don't believe he had planned out what his work, that any of that world building. He made it up on the fly.
Well, he got to do that because he's Stephen King. He had the money to do that.
he did. And he'd sprinkle in these little things so that one day he's like, if I want to, I can come back and connect that to something and make it look like that was the plan all along.
Yeah.
Most people are not going to be able to do that well. He pulled it off because he's Stephen King and he's very good, and he had, he's just got he's very good at making you believe his lies. Yeah. But because that's what the storytellers are, we're all liars. That's what we do. We lie well. But when you look at what a lot of the people are trying to do now, especially in like the DCU, MCU, all that stuff, that was not ever, like, if you look at the original comics, there was never a idea of this wide, big, expansive, epic world. The closest thing you had to that was that Submariner might show up in a book with Captain America.
Yeah.
Or, eventually you made a team out of these guys. But now it's like there's this push that everything has to be an interconnected universe, and it has to have deep lore. And so you have to go in and try to force a square into a triangular shape, and
everything suffers for it.
Exactly. It doesn't benefit the story because you're having to take these leaps of like, oh, there's this character that I've known. DC is terrible about this. They'll take a character like Batman that we've been looking at for decades and then try to turn around and say, oh, well, this was true of him the whole time. We just didn't know it.
Yep.
And that's the wrong way to do world building.
Yeah, and as a shameless promo, that's why when you and I started, we wanted to do it linearly. A timeline. It's like, okay, we can have a huge, massive world, and it looks like, it looks wide from the side, but you realize it's a past to a future. And that way you don't have to worry about concurrent things happening that mess everything up, which is what comics do, or American comics do. Everything's happening all at once at the same time, and then if it's not, they'll throw in time travel and dimensional crap to make it happen that way.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to do that. And let's be honest, we learned it. If we want to be 100% honest, we learned it from the expanded universe of Star Wars.
I was about to bring that up.
Which, despite its flaws, was still better than Disney. and still better than what usually came
Yeah.
after it. But it set a groundwork, like an unprecedented groundwork that hadn't been seen in the modern era of lore. And
Hmm.
Dune did the same thing too, except he did it in 4 books quicker, and it was one story direct, you know.
Hmm.
But I remember as a kid somehow knowing what the Old Republic was, and I didn't have any of the EU books. I think my brother had like 1 or 2, but there was this information around you could get from like little forums, maybe when we finally got the internet, or before that through interviews and like little off, like unofficial license. I don't know, like you just there was ways of knowing things. Like somehow when at like the age of 7 in the small little town, the podunk town I had with no internet, I knew that Vader had lost a fight with Obi-Wan, and that's how he got burned. And it was almost
Hmm.
like a myth, like a lore, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's but there again, when George Lucas made A New Hope, it wasn't A New Hope then, it was just Star Wars. It wasn't episode 4 then, it was just Star Wars. And all of this other stuff that was tangential to that story did not exist yet.
Yeah. He had some of it in
And
his head, but yeah.
yeah, there was some stuff in his head, but even the stuff that was in his head, by the time like his draft or his ideas for Empire Strikes Back was still wildly different from what
Yeah.
actually became the movie once
Yeah.
Lawrence Kasdan got a hold of it. And and I think that's the thing. One of the things that makes Star Wars interesting, but also makes it frustrating,
Mm-hmm.
is that there's so many cooks in the kitchen with Star Wars that a lot of the dishes that come out of the room don't taste like Star Wars anymore.
Yeah.
And for example, you look at, to go back to Tolkien, that's the product of one mind.
Mm-hmm.
You take Narnia, that's the product of one mind. That's C.S. Lewis all the way. When you take, I think the biggest reason why Babylon 5 is so
Oh yeah.
respected is
Fantastic show.
because you had one creator, and maybe yeah, he had other people that directed, he had other people obviously that had a part to play and all those different things, but it was the product of one mind.
Mm-hmm.
That story was the product of one mind that he planned out for a long time. He knew exactly where it was going, and he had already planned from the beginning ways out, like exit strategies for every
Mm-hmm.
character
In
on that
case
show.
someone died, and luckily he did, because was it Sheridan, the captain, the poor guy
Yep.
got the poor guy was dementia he got or something like that
Yeah.
at like age 40. I think it was Sheridan. And then to speak, I forget the writer's name. That's my fault. But like to his
To
credit,
Michael J.
yeah.
Straczynski, I
Well,
think.
to his credit, in the shows, they made that character. They honored him and made it super important as to why he left, and they made it really important. Which I know he had written some of that already, but that's some of the finest like respect I've ever seen in
Yeah,
Hollywood, was how they did
it
that.
was
They made him
fantastic.
probably the most important figure of the show after he left. Yeah.
Well, but to go back to that concept though of world building, that show has excellently described cultures that
Mm-hmm.
are truly alien and truly divergent from one another.
Yep.
And it maintains that. It never makes those different alien creatures, it never makes them seem like they're humans.
Mm-hmm.
They never
And
like,
they're not stereotypes. I don't mean
no,
that.
they're
I
not.
don't mean that in the woke accusation sense. I meant like it's not like we're some Star Trek characters. Like let's be honest, like the Vulcan, an entire race that's logical. Okay, again, and that's just when you look at it, you're like okay. Whereas like
Yeah.
with Babylon 5 alien races, they might have a culture or a tradition, but there was always infighting. It was
Yeah,
always they were human like beings,
right.
Yeah.
And like he was another one of those that it's so clear he knew where the story was going because he was so patient at sowing seeds for what would be coming later.
Yeah. Not a wasted episode.
Yeah, not a single moment that gets wasted. And I think that that's one of the things that it's one of the reasons why I've enjoyed Brandon Sanderson's writing.
Yeah.
Like the Stormlight Archive in particular, is that you read the first book and it just gradually opens this world to you, and you think, wow, that's so expansive, it's so huge, and it's so exciting. And then you get to the second book and it makes that first book feel like the tiniest little window.
Yeah.
But it's so gradual, and he picks up threads that he laid down so much further like before in the story. He picks back up again to where it feels natural, and you never feel like you're overwhelmed by the lore. You gradually journey into it.
Well, that's something that I struggled with as a writer, with not that execution, but that feeling of, oh, it's being too focused. It's not, it's not opening up. And then, but I realized, like, man, like, no, like, every time I read something that just throws crap at you, particularly at the expense of the narrative, I hate it. I get so bored. And I guess that's what I'm saying. I get so many people. I see the advice so much of people being like, "Oh, you want to really give people this lived in thing." It's like, if you want it lived in, there's two things you want to avoid. You want to avoid giving people a fire hose of information, and you want to avoid over detail of stuff that doesn't matter, because, and maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe this is a battle of the sexist thing. Maybe this is male versus female reading. But I get really upset when I'm reading. I don't care I don't care that the character's making some tea that's 100 years old or more from her grandmother and what it smells and tastes like. Why is she making the tea? Oh,
yeah,
to do X for the character. Why get on with the story.
Well, and see, like, I've read fantasy for a long time, fantasy and science fiction, and
for the articles strictly.
And I'll go back and the older stuff, some of the Robert Jordan stuff, or even like old Robert E. Howard stuff, where you read like Conan stories, or you go back and read Edgar Rice Burroughs. I think the reason a lot of that older fantasy is so accessible is because it did a good job of giving you a proxy character to experience the world through, and the world building was there, but it was there to service the story, not to show off.
Yeah, a lot of sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I hate when I pick up, and this is so many modern fantasy sci-fi books, I don't make it 2 chapters into them, because if I read the first 10 pages and I've already been hit with 20 different made up names of the words that don't exist, and I've got all these different things to keep up with that you made up and nobody could ever pronounce, but it's like they fell asleep and their head hit their keyboard, and there's like a glossary of all this stuff to keep up with, to be able just to be able to enter the story. I'm done. I'm not going to read that book. I don't care how good it gets later. I'm not going to read your book if I feel like I need a manual and to take notes to be able to know what I'm reading.
I got over that before I even went to college, man, which was the elitism of like tons of words in a book. Like I blame stuff like Ulysses by what's his name that wrote it. I don't remember. The Scottish guy, where he'll spend like 4 or 5 pages describing how the water's flowing in a pipe, and it all takes place over one day, and it's just these like 4 Irish guys or whatever, or Scottish guys in like a pub or whatever. I'm like, look, man, I get he wrote it as like a snarky like thing to like whatever the point of his time was, to like show that the stupid little everyday things are important, and that's an adventure unto itself. Okay, some days are also really crappy. Like,
right.
And some books, like I'm not gonna read Ulysses to say I read Ulysses. I don't care that it won a bunch of awards. I don't care if he's a magnificent writer with 1 million references per page. Good for him. Like I don't care. And that's the same thing with fantasy too. Like if you throw a glossary at me, like, dude, I'm not reading this. Because one thing, it's not gonna be as good as Tolkien. And it shouldn't take me longer to read than it does for me to read Tolkien.
Well, but see, by the same token, you remember sitting around a table and listening to me and Zeke go on and on and on about the Wheel of Time and about the Brandon Sanderson Stormlight books.
Yeah, and that was more interesting than reading Ulysses.
Well, but the thing is, you didn't have a clue what we were talking about, brother, because we were throwing all kinds of words around. But the thing is, you pick those concepts up easily and well if you pick them up and experience them gradually through reading the books. There's a ton of that stuff there. It's not all on the first page.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is like you have to gently indoctrinate people into the rules of your world. You can't just open up the door and say, here's all this crap.
Well,
swim through it.
A trick that I found, and I did it because I get tired of reading modern books, particularly of science fiction or fantasy, more fantasy than science fiction, but the mothering down talk, and they don't mean it this way, but it's like when it feels like a character's talking to you, that's the problem. Unless it's the Never-Ending Story or the Bible.
Yeah.
It shouldn't feel like, oh, well, this and this and this. And so many characters will talk like they're explaining their world to someone who's never been there, and they're the tour guide. And it's like, man, that's not how people... What I found, a trick I found when writing, another shameless plug, was to explain concepts in pieces by people in the world who aren't 100% familiar with them. And then,
it's a mosaic.
Yeah, and then have some of that confirmed or denied by other characters. Like, and some of the stuff like in our book, which we've written, it's 100% done. We'll maybe release it this year or next year. To step outside into a shameless plug, it's Godfoe, the Shaper, the Shifter, the Shadow. I'm not going to go into the whole synopsis of it, but it follows a kid named Garo who is brilliant at what he does, but he might be wrong about a lot of it because people think, because we've been fed scientism for 100 years and stuff like House and this kind of stupid ideas that one person or people can know everything about everything, especially a concept. You know what I mean? That's not how the world works. So Garo is a brilliant shaper. But what we find later in the own story and later is that he's really good at it, but he's really good at what he knows. But there's entire, almost limitless knowledge and potential of things about his subject that he doesn't know. Or readers will find that stuff he said is not true or not 100% true. He just thought it was true. But a lot of people write, like I said, we have this idea of like the brilliant guy that knows everything about everything, like the Tony Stark. And
it's the omniscient. It's the omniscient narrator.
Yeah, and that's not how things always are. You know, that's not how reality is.
Well, I mean, and to be fair, you know, to one of the biggest influences on literature and on the idea of epic literature. I mean, it's impossible. Even if you're not a believer, it's impossible to ignore the Bible as a inspiration on literature, especially on this idea of large interconnected stories.
Yeah.
You know, what's incredible about the New Testament, you know, we see all these things, these threads that are being picked up from the Old Testament, from the law and the prophets and all these, all these.
It's probably the most self-referential book of all time.
Yeah, it's incredible how many references there are, but it's amazing because, you know, you have people that read it with a modern mindset and modern lens and say, well, you know, why didn't the people, why didn't they understand that Jesus is the Messiah if all these prophecies existed? Those prophecies were so widespread and just a sprinkle here, a sprinkle there, and it's not like it wasn't all together in one spot to read. It wasn't a collected book like we have now. And even Jesus's own followers, even the disciples who'd spent all those years with him and he was teaching them, after he rose from the dead, it said that he still had to open their minds to the scriptures. Like he had to go through the prophets, and he is like, all right, let's start at the beginning and let me explain all of these things that I fulfilled, because it isn't a single picture. It is a mosaic, and he had to open their minds to understand all of those references and how he fulfilled them. You know, I think that if you front load a reader with all of those connections out the gate, then they never get to have an aha moment later that blows their mind.
Yeah, and people also like to not feel stupid and talked down to. Like,
yeah, there's that too.
They also like putting pieces together themselves, and I think so many. This is kind of off topic, but on topic too. I think so many people like J.J. Abrams and people who think like that. Like, I think the internet kind of broke them because the whole thing became not doing. You can't have spoilers. And it's like,
Yeah.
dude, if people are spoiling the end of your book, that means you put the proper breadcrumbs and pieces in place for them to understand a logical conclusion to your story. That's
Right.
good. But stuff like Lost, and like I said, what I call the J.J. Abrams effect, which is either not knowing how you're going to end something or letting the outside world influence it to the point where it becomes this gray blah. I mean, who cares? I mean, Breaking Bad, like, there's no way Walt's going to live by the end of it. I mean, he's got cancer. What was going to happen is cancer's going to get magically cured, and he gets off with it, and he just lives alone. It's like two options. He could live alone for the rest of his life, or he could die. And Walt doesn't. His hubris won't let him not die in a blaze of glory.
Right.
But see, that was written mainly, I think, by like one guy, wasn't it? Garth Ennis. Babylon 5, like you said, like so many things. Like it doesn't have to be a singular genius vision, but bureaucracy and, let's be honest, what they call in school group projects ruin everything. Like like that's something that's not taught. It's like maybe everybody else's opinion doesn't matter. Maybe you should just do what you want to do.
But and we can continue to list off things, but all of our favorite things.
Yeah.
All of our favorite things. You can track those ideas back. They belong to one creative mind.
Yeah.
Yes, there's other people that bring it to life, but there's one mind that's behind those things. It's Otto that's behind Evangelion and makes it work.
Yeah.
It's Otomo who's behind Akira, and that's the reason why it's so great. And it's always going to be that way.
Yeah. The more cooks or the more chefs you add, usually the worse it gets. I think if I had to describe one of the books that stuck with me my whole life was The Giver. And it's not a big book. It's not a long book. And it's written in a strange way. It's written from, I think his name's Jonas. I could be wrong. A kid's point of view. But it lets you know how the world works. But it also, it's just mysterious enough to make it even worse. And that's what stuck with me so much is like you get like the hard rules of how this world is. Well, you get that it's totalitarian to the point that, I mean, my God, I think they like block puberty? Isn't that a thing? I think they block puberty. I didn't realize that sentence until I said it. That's a whole other topic. Oh, I didn't mean to even go into that. But anyway.
It's in the book.
I know. I didn't think about it before I said it. I don't think they even do that because they're so totalitarian. But anyway, they kill children if they don't fit in. All right, that one I had to throw in there just as a jab. That's funny. But there's so much you don't see, and that's what helps build the world in your head because she's such a fantastic writer. I forget her name. Lois or Lewis.
I've read it, but it's been a really long time.
Well, and the ending is so oblivious, too, and it's just, but it's
ambiguous.
Ambiguous. She does everything so well. She navigates. She's such a good writer. Lois Lowry, I think it is. She does so many things that you shouldn't do as a writer, but she like does them and she nails the landing on all of them, such as the mysterious kind of world building, the mysterious ending. I don't know. I can't praise that book enough for being like a technical marvel of world building and writing.
Well, see, and I will always err on the side of show, don't tell.
Yeah, and people are pushing back against
That's
that now.
well, I don't care because
I
they're
know
wrong.
that's another
It's
topic.
always best to show and not tell. Uh, I'll give you a great example. I know you probably haven't ever watched it or haven't watched any much of it, but the cartoon Adventure Time.
Yeah, I've seen some of it.
It's it's so popular for a reason.
Yeah,
A lot of it has to do with the aesthetic. A lot of it has to do with the humor. It is actually really funny.
yeah,
But what impressed me the most, because I for whatever reason I really enjoyed that show and I've watched all of it several times. What impressed me with that show is that there's all this silly stuff that's going on. Like the plot lines are these silly little stories, but if you pay attention to the backgrounds and just the locations where they're at, they're telling a separate story in the background of that.
yeah,
And there's all these little hints at a that this is a post-apocalyptic
yeah. And then they
existence.
finally confirmed it too, with
Yeah, but they do it so gradually.
Yeah,
It's just like every once in a while they drop you another breadcrumb, or every once in a while you get a piece of that lore, and then and I think that's the way I prefer. I will take that over the exposition. Like I will take that over the big opening scroll that covers 3,000 years worth of stuff.
Yeah.
Like I like the idea of seeing something in the background and being really intrigued by it, and then eventually it pays off.
Well, that's a story. That's not a lecture.
Exactly.
I think a lot of writers now are just so used to writing term papers.
Right.
And not writing stories. I think they think if I learn to write a bunch of papers, I'll learn how to write a story, and that's not how it works.
Well, and you said it best at the beginning. World building is about the characters. It's giving the characters an interesting place to play. That's why, like, we've got all these different eras in the Godfo universe. We created different sandboxes that our characters can interact in, but it's always to serve the story and to serve the characters. We got these great characters, so we got to give them a world that is worthy of a good character.
Yeah.
But you can't just do world building for world building's sake, because then you end up with something that's boring and soulless.
I think a lot of writers, particularly young ones, come up with a world or an idea, and then they make their character react to it, and usually that character is them.
Yeah.
And that's all. They don't know other people. Like I think the reason that Star Wars works so well, other than it has two of the coolest things ever in writing history. It has the Force and it has lightsabers. The lightsaber is the greatest fantasy weapon ever made. You're never gonna beat it. Like as far as, or I should say, coolest. Like there's nothing cooler than
cool.
that. That was lightning in a bottle. I think Flash Gordon did it first, but it looked really bad. Like I think they did like a laser sword type thing. The lightsaber killed it. And the Force, it's so ambiguous and it's so strange, and it's and what it does is basically telekinesis. I know it's not, Star Wars nerds. I know it's not, but on screen it's basically that. But now it's a religion, and now it's like a living thing, and that's really cool. All that to say, and that's what really pissed me off about the sequel trilogy, when people are like, "Oh, Star Wars is about the Force." No, it's not. No, it's not. Because if you take the three main characters, Luke, Han, and Leia, and you take them out, they're still great characters. You could put them in another story because that's what they were. He took three characters from other stories, these archetypes, and he put them in his story. And then he added salt to them. And like, how do you do that? Well, you make Luke Vader's son. So now this character that's already good is it's now inseparable from my story. Well, he did the same thing with Vader, this big bad dude. I'll put him so much into the story, he's inseparable from it. Like, if that does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
you have to. It has to be a stew, man. It like Tolkien, like you said. It doesn't. You don't. And some guys can come up with it in like 6 months and throw it out there. But it has to be that these characters and these concepts are fermenting together, and the things that don't work together fall away.
Yeah, because those threads need to connect to something.
Yeah.
And the worst thing that a creator or writer or whatever can do is lay those threads out and have no clue what they're connected to.
J.J.
And figure
Abrams.
I'll figure it out when I get there. I'll cross that bridge when it comes to it.
Mhm.
You will
Yep.
burn that
should,
bridge.
Yeah,
you
should
never
cut
cross it.
If you realize that, you should cut them off. You should resolve
Yeah.
them early.
Yep, resolve it and leave it behind, because if you don't know where it's going, that nobody is going to want to take that journey with you.
Yep, it does.
Or they're going to take it and they're going to be really, really pissed at the end of it because you didn't deliver on what you promised. And we can get into that a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
There is an integrity and a responsibility, or there should be, from creators of content. And granted, I know, hey, it's your story. You tell the story you want to tell. I get that. But if you're going to ask people to pay for it, if you're not just putting it up for free, if you're asking people to invest in it and you're saying, hey, I want you to buy this, don't sell them an empty box.
The mystery box.
Yeah, don't sell them an empty box. Don't say, okay, I'm dangling all these threads that I know I'm never going to deliver on. Or I'm going to deliver some really haphazard,
subversive,
poorly thought out, garbage that is not what you asked for.
I'm going to subvert expectations.
And suck. But like, I feel like you owe people a finished idea.
People don't want to.
They
don't want to admit that it's entertainment. It's entertainment. They won't admit that it's entertainment. It is. And since it's entertainment, it needs to entertain. It needs to pay off.
And here's the thing, and people can disagree with me, and I don't care, but I know that you have a legal ownership. You got the copyright. I get that.
Yeah.
And I know you can say, well, this is my story because I wrote it. I get that, and I agree with that. But the moment that you sell it to somebody, it becomes theirs.
Yeah. That doesn't mean they
get not to the same. Yeah, they don't have authority over it.
They don't get a say in it, but
they don't have authority over it. But there is a degree of ownership that you've offered them by selling it to them.
Well, yeah,
and it's a covenant.
Well, it's like
it's a covenant. It's an agreement.
To me, it's like a household, and maybe this is a bad idea, but it's not. But like, my child doesn't have any authority in the house, but everything I do has them in mind for their best interest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She doesn't rule the house, but that house is hers.
Yep.
And you want her to feel blessed in that place. You want her to feel loved. You want her to feel appreciated. She has to know that she's been thought of, and she's going to be provided all the things that she's there for. And I think if you're inviting people to be fans, I mean, you're saying, "Hey, I want you to be a fanatic about what I'm creating. I want you to be
come into my
fan.
house."
Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. You're saying, "Come into my house." You don't invite people in your house and then kick them in the face.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think we're on a good concept here, and I want to run with it. I think a lot of artists don't know how to be good hosts. And I think people don't like being hosts because I think they think that kind of idea is outdated or whatever. But I mean, I'm not going to tie that to feminism and all that, which would be fun to do. But you're entertaining people, and it's not just that you're juggling. It's that in the classical sense, you're coming to their house, you're feeding them. You're providing entertainment, as in not some cheap laugh, but you're giving them something for an evening they'll never forget. And that's a fun, joyous thing. And maybe, like I said,
Yeah.
maybe that comes from a classical worldview, at least, or like a Christian worldview or something. Probably not, because there's tons of cultures around the world that do that, particularly the Eastern cultures that do that, known for their
Hmm.
hospitality. That's the thing. I think hospitality to your fans is a lost art. Not just respect, 'cause respect's definitely gone, but hospitality, creating something for them to that you cultivate and grow for them. And I've never read his stuff, but I know he's a fantastic writer because like what I've seen of him and the people that I trust to know fantastic writers say it. But Brandon Sanderson's done that. Like that dude delivers for his fans, and they
And he
reward him for it.
constantly he constantly interacts with them too. I mean, if you go on his website, he's got up. He lets you know what he's working on, how far he's gotten on it. What like he really keeps everybody in the loop.
Transparency. Yep.
Yeah, and that transparency is what makes people say, I feel like this guy really cares about us
Mm-hmm.
as a fan base.
They trust him.
Yeah, and that trust is earned.
Yeah.
And if you betray trust, gaining it back is really really hard. And that's what DC's about to experience.
With Snyder.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I really genuinely believe that that's what they're going to experience. I think a lot of people. I'm excited about the Flash. I'm going to go see the Flash.
Because
I'm mad at myself for how excited I
well,
am,
everything good
but
in it is from not DC. It's from.
but that's the thing is the main thing I want to see is it's so clear that the Snyder fingerprints are all over it.
Yep.
It's still so tied to the thing that I love so much, and I'm excited to see Michael Keaton as Batman again.
Which is also
But
not current DC.
exactly,
Yeah.
the moment that movie ends, I anything that comes after that, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. I don't want to see a new Batman. I don't want to see a new Superman. I could care less about Superman Legacy.
Yeah.
I could care less about Batman and Robin, whatever version of that they do. I just don't care. And it's because they have so spit in the face of they take fans who care about what they've done
Mm-hmm.
and then they say, well, you're toxic for loving it.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a whole thing there, and that
It's that whole if we've invited you into our house, but now we're mad that you're on our couch.
we invited you into our house to give you a lecture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to tell you how toxic you are.
Yeah. Now buy our product.
Yeah. And say what you want about Snyder as a person. Everything I've seen, he seems
What
like
is
a
there?
good
What is
dude.
there to say? Like,
Everybody that works with him adores him.
if there was a scandal, it would have already come out.
Yeah. And the reality is that dude, he genuinely wants to give people what they're looking for from him. He wanted to deliver on his promise.
Yeah, still does. I
And
think.
whether you agree that he did or didn't achieve that, you cannot say that man didn't champion the opportunity and do everything he could to deliver what he promised. And I would agree with you. I don't think he's done yet. I don't think we're going to get more movies, but I do think we're going to get more of these events and conventions and things like what's out there right now with the marathon.
Yeah, especially this one
that
just
sold
sold
out
out in 7 minutes.
in minutes, in minutes. And we're talking $500-$600 tickets, and it
Yep.
sold out in minutes. And I do think that if anybody at DC has a brain in their head, we will at least get the rest of his trilogy as a comic book.
Yeah.
I think we'll at least get to finish the story.
I would hope that we'd get the rest of them in movies, but I don't know. I don't know what to say about it because I mean, companies are stupid, man. Companies will, like successful companies, will turn down free money all day, every day. They do it
Yeah, I was about
all
to
the
say.
time.
I mean, they really have they could just be printing money right now. They really genuinely could.
But
But
it depends on who you are and what you're willing to say. They care more
Yeah.
about control. They care more about a guarantee. They care more about a government bailout than they do about making legitimate profits.
Right.
Which, that's the whole thing. Whatever. If you make
But see,
something
that
good,
goes
you should
back.
profit from it.
That goes back to the heart of this conversation, though, is that people either care about money or they care about their fans.
Yeah.
You, you're not going to see a company that cares about both.
No, but
You're not going to see creators that care about
what's
both.
crazy though, if you care for your fans, you'll make a profit.
Of
Because
course you will.
yeah, if you have fans, not making a profit is you not managing something well. If you have people who will
Yeah.
buy your stuff, then you need to adjust your lifestyle and your way to make a profit off what they pay for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's the same thing when I'm feeding my cats. If I buy some expensive food and feed it to them and they won't eat it, well, then I'm not gonna buy it again. I'm gonna give them the food I know they'll eat.
Yeah. Well, and you can also come up with different ways. If we're gonna run with that, Snyder is proving that you can make money off something that's already made. You don't have to shovel out crap. You can find ways to make money off something that people already enjoy. You see what I'm saying? He made something that people like, and he can keep reselling it to them, which you would think that'd be the foundations of capitalism because it is. And you think these companies would know that, but now everything seems to be like new product, new product, new product, new product, new product, instead of Disney had this figured out for decades. Like we'll close our vaults and then we'll resell the same movie to a new generation. And that's what kind of sustained them whenever they were putting out crap after their first crash until the 90s came.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably what they're going to have to do now. I expect to see a lot of reissues of the original Star Wars trilogy soon.
For real.
But
the reality is those will always sell well. It'll always sell well.
They made something quality. And again,
You really want to see it sell? Let them go back and do the unspecialized editions.
Yep.
If they restored the original theatrical versions of those movies and put them out on 4K, HD, whatever, those things would sell so hard.
Or put them in theater. Again.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
They would make so much bank.
Yeah.
I'd be there. I'd watch all three back to back.
I don't think their hubris will let them. I think.
Of course it won't.
Well, you want to talk about the goal of world building. That's the goal of world building, is to build a world that people want to escape to. But so many people now are building worlds that are so much like ours, or they're a lecture on ours, that people aren't getting. Well, they're not escaping into anything.
Well, say what you will about the movies, and I don't really. I haven't watched the second one, and the first one it's just okay to me. But there's no denying that the world building of Avatar worked for somebody, because there were people that had severe depression because they couldn't live in Pandora.
Yeah, there's people that have like mass depression because they can't cut off their arm or leg. Like,
I'm not saying that it's healthy. I'm just saying that world building worked for somebody.
Yeah, I'm not. I haven't watched any of them because it looks boring to me. It looks like Dances with Wolves, but with blue people.
It is.
But I'm glad somebody liked it. But yeah, I think it's cool that exists and that he can make something on that scale of escapism, because that's what Metaverse is trying. But see, the reason Metaverse will fail, and I don't want to be proven wrong. I want it to fail. It's because it's just a repackaging of our world.
Exactly. It's
and
not.
Nobody wants that. New. Nobody wants that. It's, well, hey, how can you have a corporate meeting where the people are somehow even uglier?
Let me ask you this, and I know as adults now it's not the same thing, but growing up, what was the created world that you most wanted to live in? Like you most wanted to experience?
Star Wars and X-Men.
If you could have gone,
hands down, Star Wars and X-Men. If I could have been like a mutant living in Xavier's place, blowing up stuff in my mind, that. Or if I could have been like Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, Star Wars, I definitely Man, as a kid, I wanted to experience aliens and other planets so bad.
Well,
I
again,
still do.
somehow Lucas took what was already like culturally probably the coolest thing ever, which was like samurai, and then put them in space and made it cooler. And
Hmm.
like I said, somehow made it cooler with a Jedi. And like, no, if you could be a Jedi over, if you had to pick anything versus Jedi, man, it's hard not to pick Jedi. Like the cloaks
Yeah,
alone,
that's true. Yeah, that's
it's
true.
that saber, man. And at least Mandalorian season 2 finale got that when they zoomed in on Luke's hand and the blade
Hmm.
came out. It's like, oh man, like I've got chills just now talking about it. And I'm not like a fanboy cry on a camera, but it's like that's what it is though. Like that's what Star Wars. You sum it up as how cool it is. You just get that close up of that glove and just it's like holy
Yeah,
crap. That's the coolest
it's
thing I've ever
still
seen.
it's still so well. It's the same thing at the end of Rogue One when
Yeah,
Vader shows up.
which
You're like,
which I
oh,
hated that movie.
oh, yeah, but you
Yeah,
can't deny that when
no, like
Vader
that
showed
that
up, that it
scene,
got real, son.
that scene, because all you see is like darkness and then like that sound and that sight. Because it says so much. It says again world building. It says it says not only well, it says we're here with a Jedi, like the
Hmm.
the highly trained, most deadly thing in the universe, and that thing's gonna cut right through me.
These guys are screwed. They're
Yeah,
done.
it was. I don't know. I don't know if you can tell a better the archetype of like the knight and the sword better than the lightsaber because like it's cool as far as pure coolness because like it's cool watching a samurai take his sword out or watching a knight take it off. I mean, Braveheart did that with the back mount,
Hmm.
which I don't think was ever used in history ever, but the back scabbard. But then before that, um, George Lucas been having this little thing, and then a blade comes out of it. Was just I can't
It was it was so
yeah
cool.
I can't stop talking about how it's probably the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Hmm.
That's what fantasy should do, though. Like like that's what it's supposed to be. Like when kids would see like storybooks of like a knight fighting a dragon, that's supposed to be like the coolest thing they've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, there's a reason why, like, to this day, the first 10 minutes of Akira, when they're just on those
yeah.
awesome, crazy bikes and
It's
riding through Neo
probably
Tokyo, is so.
isn't it the most like homaged anime in history?
Oh, yeah, of course.
That and like the boxing punch from that one anime, the double knockout.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That was incredible. Or I think about the first time, and I know it was a weird movie, and I'm fully aware of how strange a movie it was. But as a kid, I can't remember like anything being cooler in the moment than seeing the giant sandworms and seeing like
yeah,
Paul riding it in the
yeah.
original like David Lynch Dune. That was such a cool thing. It was just so freaking cool.
Well, it's something I think something you'll never experience is part of cool,
Hmm.
and I think that's what's been
Yeah.
lost. I think that's part of what of coolness that's been lost because nothing's cool anymore, because everything's about your world and what you do experience, and it's like that's not cool, man.
These are the things that everybody like. If they could have three wishes, this is the stuff everybody would wish for.
Yeah,
You know, who in their right mind wouldn't wish for a DeLorean time
yeah,
machine or a hoverboard, man?
yeah. I mean, and I get why I was a little too old for it. The first Harry Potter came out when I was like 9 or 10, and like I feel like a jerk, but I mean, I feel like saying this, but I mean, I was past it. I was reading Dune and like
Yeah, I
full
was too.
novels
I
by then.
was too. I never could get into it, but
I
I
read them as an
do
adult.
understand why.
Yeah, I read them as an adult, and I'm like, these are good. Like, she's a good writer. If you had to say anything about J.K. Rowling, whether you agree with her or not, she's a good writer, um,
Mhm.
and a good world builder, clearly. And that's the thing. Like when you read them, it is a different world. It's probably the only suburban fantasy other than Narnia I think really nailed it because it completely separates the two. It takes this
Mhm.
kid and it puts him somewhere else, and it does the transition really smoothly. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that also helps for American readers too, because England already feels like a different world. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And I think that's
Mhm.
probably what helped with. I think that's probably what helped with Narnia too, more so than over there. But
Mhm.
anyway, um, but yeah, I can get why kids all they wanted was a wand and a broom. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean the lightsaber is cooler, but I get it. I get why that generation went head over heels for it.
Well, and like I remember how awesome I thought it was when I saw Voltron for the first time, and
Yeah.
like that idea of like the giant robot lions that
Well,
all come together to
everybody wanted to
form
be a
one.
Power Ranger too. You know, like
Oh yeah. Or like I was really into Robotech. I wanted to fly one of those Veritech fighters so bad.
yeah,
You know, it's just that idea of, like you said, creating a world that people wish they could go experience,
yeah,
and then you give them that opportunity when they read it, or
yeah,
when they watch it, or when they listen to it, or listen, you know, whatever avenue you give them to come into the house, so to speak, like you had said. You're offering people an escape. You're offering them a chance to live in a different world for a little while. And I think it's fair to say that you should at least have that world framed out.
yeah. And
It
another,
should be stable.
well, another a selfless promo, but it is our show. Dang it! Is that's what I obsessed over. We'd had everything written. And I'm telling the audience this because Josh knows the story. The book was written, all this stuff was written, and it's like what is there that needs to like? There's something because remember we talked about like Star Wars is cool. There's something
Mhm.
cool about the aesthetic and the way it looks and the lightsaber and the robes. And for me and for us, it was like adding Tales to the Shadows. It was like there
Mhm.
needs to be something like distinctive that stands out that's kind of cool. And little
Yep.
things like that of just thinking like, man, what if I saw like a toy of it? Would I want it?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that's every time I do a character design for one of our comics. That's the metric for me is that when I'm done drawing it, does it look like a figure that I wish was sitting on my shelf right now? And if it doesn't, I go back to the
yeah.
drawing board literally.
Well, that's like I'm so excited to do stuff like Colt with his arms like splitting into 8 different things, and they don't even look like arms anymore and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like that. I think
They look
that's
like that statue from New York.
yeah. The aesthetic abortion. Ugh.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
and the same thing like with Kolga. Kolga just when you see her with that scythe
yeah.
and
And Stu.
she's in her the coat and Stu, who you guys don't know who Stu is yet, but you will, and he's fantastic. But like
That's
she
how he
just
introduces
looks,
himself.
she's stupendous. But like the visuals are just cool. Like the characters are so cool, and you know it's almost a lost art. But see, like you look at My Hero Academia,
Mm-hmm.
that's why it's so
Yeah. Some of it's
successful.
cool.
I mean, can't tell me that's not cool.
Yeah.
You
Everything that's
know?
and I was staring at that statue when I was there, and it's like everything, even down to his shoe design, they thought
Yeah,
about, and
every
it's cool.
every inch of that character is awesome.
Well, and there's nothing on that that's from our world.
Yep.
Like no one wears gloves unless you're Michael Jackson, which is probably why he was so cool. Other than his ungodly musical ability and talent. But everything he did was cool. And like I know we've jumped off topic, but I don't care because that's what world building comes down to from a non-technical standpoint is rule of cool. And there's like documentaries you can find like Michael Jackson with like world class studio musicians, and he's telling them no, like no, that's not.
Yeah.
It needs to be like this, and they're like, what?
Hmm.
He's like, right here, and like he tells them like what beat it needs to be on, and then they play it, and it's like, oh man, that feels so good. He's like, yeah, like isn't that cooler? Which that was that's what Todd McFarlane accredits his entire career to is just looking at a piece of paper or looking at a drawing and saying, how can this look cooler? And I know that
It needs spikes and chains.
yeah, and I know that
And he
ran away in the 90s, but it was right. Like that initial hit was dead on.
hmm
Yeah.
hmm
And they were right about that. The extreme guys, which I know get made fun of, but even when Alex Ross tried to make fun of it when he made Magog. Magog is the coolest looking villain ever. Like I have a statue of him right there. He
He's
looks
a
awesome.
really awesome design.
Which even Mark Waid was like, I had to admit, like I thought he looked great. Like he looked so cool. It's like,
well, Lobo was the same way.
Yeah.
Lobo was like a satire of like the Wolverine,
Cable
Berserker,
and Wolverine,
Punisher,
yeah.
Cable, and he ended up being like the most awesome
Yeah, he
looking
was
character
awesome.
ever. He's like Gene Simmons on steroids, had a baby with like Danzig. It's so awesome.
What was it? Was it did Evil Ernie come first before him? I don't
No,
remember.
he's before Evil Ernie, but
Yeah.
Evil Ernie was dope too.
Yeah, Evil Ernie was when they accept like just the craziness of it all. But even during that time you had Matt Wagner come out with Grendel, which was like a true to form comic book superhero story, but it was about a villain, and it was like classically paced, and it was like, I don't know, it was not a deconstruction, which that's a whole other thing we'll have to go into. But anyway, yeah, advice for world building. I would say start with, from a writing standpoint, I would say start with, was it Dave Gibbons? I think who wrote it, Neuromancer. Try to do that, but then crank it back down to like 9. Because all that dude does is drop you into his world. Like, you want to talk like immersion, lived in, bam. He just says, figure it out.
Yeah. Deep end.
Yeah.
Splash around.
And I would like, take that and dial it back.
Well, I would say, you know, if I were to give somebody advice, you can take people anywhere.
Yeah.
Like you can take your readers literally anywhere. And as long as you tether them to a character that they care about and understand first.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't start, like, The Hobbit doesn't work without Bilbo.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to start by having a character that you care about, and then you can take that story anywhere you want. But you've got to know, if you introduce a mystery, you need to know the skeleton inside of it. Like, you need to know what's in the box, even if nobody else does, because that will keep you from creating something that's contradictory to itself that's going to implode later.
Well, with mystery, the focus shifted, because mystery was always about, the mystery is for the character. And then it shifted. Hey, I'm sorry, he took his headphones off for a second. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay, yeah, the mystery was about to be that the character doesn't know what's happening. And
exactly,
as proxy of that, the reader doesn't, but maybe the reader can put it together. It shifted to, now it always has to be the reader doesn't know, or the watcher doesn't know. And they can't know until the very end when I tell them everything. And so many things have done it. And Sherlock Holmes, like the first, those 2 movies with
the Guy Ritchie ones that had Robert Downey.
Yeah, Robert Downey Jr. did it kind of okay. It was like, okay, it was acceptable. Like, all these things are resolved, and you see all the little pieces you could not have seen. Like, there's no way you could have seen the pieces, and it puts it all together at the end. But then, like, people started really trying to do that over and over and over again in different mediums of being like, there's no way the reader could have put this together. The watcher could have put this together.
Like, by far the better version of that.
Yeah.
The way to do that the right way is The Sixth Sense.
Yep.
Where there's nobody, that movie never lies to you.
Mm-hmm.
And it never hides anything from you.
Yeah. It shows you. And that's what makes it worse.
Yeah. It never lies to you. It never hides anything from you. It just did a great job exploiting what it understands about the way we see things and the way we come to a story.
Well, there's a great comedian joke where he's talking about the differences between men and women. He's like, I'll give you an example. The Sixth Sense has Bruce Willis's character. He's dead, but nobody knows it. But we see him interact with his wife, but she never talks to him. So we just assumed, oh, she's been mad at him for 2 years. We logically had a better idea of just accepting that she was just consistently mad at him than we did of thinking that maybe he's dead.
Plus, like I love it's not. I loved the meme the other day about I saw about RoboCop saying this man died and we still made him go to work.
Yeah. But yeah, but that's the whole thing is like the Sixth Sense. It doesn't lie; it shows you everything. But you kind of kick yourself a little bit. That's the whole point, that you missed it, you know. And but you do put it together. But there are those kind of cultural things like that. Like you assumed his wife was mad at him, and that's why she wasn't talking to him. And that's a normal thing to assume.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and great characters. Yeah, I think that's the heart of it. I think if you want to do world building, you have to have characters people care about, and it's so hard to do that. And I didn't watch it all. I didn't watch all of it, but what I did, I liked and enjoyed. But I didn't grow up on it, so that's part of it. Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh man, I loved Avatar.
Yeah, but if it had just focused on, I don't know how to say it. Is it Aang?
Yeah.
If it had started and focused completely on Aang, it would have been awful because he's so annoying when you first meet him. But that's the point.
Yeah.
It starts with, is Kira the chick?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm getting the names right. Okay, it starts with her and her brother for the most part, and then it introduces him, and then it introduces the other one. So she's more of the straight man at first.
Yeah. He.
Well, that's the whole point. He has to mature and grow up.
Yeah, he has to grow up, and he does not become truly the main character that drives that narrative until about halfway through the series.
Yeah,
and even then, he doesn't supersede these other characters.
He's more of a trickster, playful genie character on her journey, because it's her world. That's the whole thing. Is like he's like, I'm from a time when we were all working together, everything was hunky dory, and we're playing. He's actually from a past that's not as bad as his current present, and that's a really interesting storyline to go through. I think that's why it did so well. And yeah, you're absolutely right. She's more of the straight man character. It's more of her trying to use him to save her world, and then you realize it is his story. And he's learning from her, and she's learning from him, and they're learning from each other and all together. And I think that's why it did so well. Because the powers never really intrigued me that much. Like I wouldn't want to, if I had to pick that or Jedi, I'm picking Jedi. But I get why people again liked it. It took them out of this world and put them somewhere else.
I wouldn't mind having a flying buffalo.
Yeah, that'd be kind of cool. But over a lightsaber, no. But
yeah. So I guess if you have to take away anything from this story, you need lightsabers.
Yeah, if you want to make a cool story, yeah, you need a lightsaber. What's funny though is that I'm looking at it over here. I love Neon Genesis Evangelion, but no one wants to live in that world.
No,
and that's the whole thing. No. He doesn't want to be there either.
No, nobody wants to live in that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole thing that could go with it. It did really well, especially with the female characters.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, that's a whole other journey I'd like to get into. But I get why kids like Chainsaw Man. I don't dig it, but I get it. I get that it looks like Wolverine on steroids, and it's violence, it's crazy, and it's got like hot chicks in it and blood. What's not? I mean, it's like a Kiss album cover. Like,
yeah, I mean, I get it too. I don't like it either, but I understand why. I understand why it's cool.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so I know you've given this before, but and you just did, but what do you have any more advice for, particularly for artists for world building or character creation, other than rule of cool?
A rule of cool is a big thing. In my previous video about character design, uh, practicality is important. Even when you're creating something that's, you know, doesn't exist in the real world and never would, it still needs to make some sort of sense.
Yeah.
From a practical standpoint, at least the fantasy to me works best when it's at least somewhat grounded in reality. You have to have a grounding in a physical reality so that you can break that reality and make it work well.
Yeah.
Um, I would also say that when it comes to designing a fantasy world or a sci-fi world, you you got to avoid being derivative
Yeah.
of other things. Like so, you need to ask yourself when you look at a design is like, when somebody sees this, are they going to say, "Well, this looks just like something I've already seen"? How do I take it a step further?
Yeah.
And I think that when it, even from a visual standpoint, like you and I have talked about, and I'm not going to give away anything, but in one of the eras of our world, we had this idea of a desert that's glass,
Yeah.
right? All right. So we also, when we thought about, oh, this is a really cool idea to have a desert that's glass, but then we also step back and say, okay, within our world, within our lore, within our history, how and why was this created?
Yeah. What's the purpose? If it has no
Yeah,
purpose.
what's the purpose and what is the in-world explanation for it? And does it serve story and does it serve character? And when we found out it did,
Mm-hmm.
well then we start thinking, okay, if that's why it is the way it is and how it came to be the way it is, well now I can design it. Now
Yeah.
I can think about what it looks like because I know how it was created. I know why it exists.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing is like you can just start drawing something and come up with something that probably looks cool, but whether it's going to fit in your world or whether it's going to stand out, in a bad way, really comes down to whether you understand it.
Yeah.
And and it's the same thing with writing as it is with art, as it is with music, as it is with anything else. You're the conductor. You got to know where the train's going.
Mm-hmm. The worst part is having things that don't matter.
Right.
And I know somebody
Yeah.
will
If
push back
it's
on that, but
anything that drags the story down is something that you just need to cut.
well, the,
It
the the
just
pushback to that is, well, what about like this romantic, kind of flowery, kind of expansive, appealing to the senses? Like, great, do that in a great way. Like, do that in a cool way.
in the background,
Yeah.
let it be something that's set dressing.
Mm-hmm.
Don't spend 10 pages talking about it.
Yeah. Which is
Just put it, just let it be there.
which is something
Let
Stephen
people
King has
wonder
been
about it.
guilty of.
Oh yeah, very much so. He benefits from an editor
Yeah. All
because he
right.
doesn't know how to edit himself.
Edit yourself before you wreck yourself.
Edit yourself before you read it yourself.
That's good. I might actually put that up on our sites. Um, I'm gonna let you go because we're both pretty tired and have
Yeah,
other
absolutely.
obligations tonight. Books coming out very soon this spring. Will be Apollyon 20XX. We have some great, cool, exciting stuff coming up. We have Lore Master Hans, who will explain our eras in great detail, in a great voice, and in a cool way with videos. He's also going to split off on his own channel and do kind of like lore of other franchises that he thinks are fun or real life events. Like I think he did a thesis on the Civil War not too long ago. He was saying, and now he's going back through like Revolutionary War history and that kind of stuff. So we're expanding. We're expanding into different all kinds of different stuff. I don't want to say right now, and I hate that we keep kind of playing things close to the chest. But until Apollyon 20XX comes out, we can't really go into too much detail. But short films, I mean, name it, guys. We're gonna make this universe huge, and it's already cool, but it's about to get a whole lot cooler.
So like and subscribe. Follow us on social media. Sign up to the mailing list. I know we say this every episode, but it's still true. We want to be able to invite you into the house and let you know that you belong there. And we got a lot of cool stuff coming. Yeah, we want to be good hosts.
Yeah. All right. Till next time. Peace.
Peace.